Welcome to the North Oakland County Historical Museum. We're going to continue our conversation with Brian and Eric Silkowski about the storm of 1896. On the last episode, I think we left off, we were talking about the storm finally arriving at Oakwood and the people actually being distracted to one degree because they could observe one funnel cloud where the most dangerous part of the storm was approaching them without them knowing. So here we have this thriving village. The storm pretty much, my understanding, has wiped everything out.
Yep. We've been going through, there's various listings of companies in some of the books that are out there, and it just all disappeared after this. Even though they may have received some assistance from the state, from Michigan, it just never recovered, because literally their customers all disappeared, if you will. I mean, there's many people who still live there, but not quite to the same level. And a lot of traffic went from Oakwood to Thomas and Oxford.
Yeah, I know the one story of Dr. Watts' bachelor had a practice in Oakwood, and after the storm, when the storm occurred, of course, he lost his home, all his personal possessions, his office, his medical instruments, all his medicines. When his patients and friends and neighbors needed him most, he had nothing to work with. And after the storm, he came to Oxford. He didn't even try to practice medicine there anymore himself. So I think it probably made a big change. So after hitting Oakwood, the storm continued to the east, almost going straight east down Oakwood Road for some distance.
Yep. And it, eventually, newspaper accounts determined it split. I believe we discussed that in the prior episode on that. And one part moved off toward Thomas as it was falling apart, as it was decaying. However, even though it's falling apart, it is still very dangerous. The baseline definition of a tornado is obviously a violently rotating column of air. It doesn't matter that it's falling apart, it is still very deadly. And the other part is forming up and scooting to the south of that primary tornado that's heading for Thomas. The tornado that's approaching Thomas gets in there, and Thomas is a little bit more built up than Oakwood, more of a street grid, more businesses, more homes, train station, and the apparatus for such. And it starts taking that place apart. There are a lot of reports of houses that are majorly damaged, if not completely annihilated, with both tornadoes. Dr. Sawder's residence was completely annihilated. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But even though there was that one tornado that was doing that, you also had another one directly to the south that was wiping out farmhouses as well. The Copeman residence and farm was annihilated, as well as the Skillman residence as well. And the Skillman was actually part of the Thomas tornado. Oh, my apologies.
Remember?
But both were wildly annihilated, of course. Down to the foundation, nothing left in the general vicinity. In one case, one of the houses was scattered upwards of several acres downwind. You don't see that in weak tornadoes. It was definitely violent. Like I said, we're definitely thinking F5 in that region for damage.
So even though we're getting close to the end of the path of the destruction from the tornado events, it's still severe enough that it's a high intensity storm.
Definitely. And from photographic evidence, there's definite indication of that. Even though the center of the storm, even of the one that struck Thomas, passed to the south of town, it was still causing wild damage to the town itself. Walls pushed in, buildings collapsed.
A piano flew 300, a piano, which is a very heavy object, flew 300 feet through the air. All this kind of stuff. So it's like, it did, in some of the photos, like the Copeman that we had collected, it was obliterated. It literally, if they found anything, it was miraculous.
Okay. And then in your research, have you found any personal accounts of the storm hitting the Thomas area? I don't think I've seen them of hitting Oakwood, but I haven't seen any personal accounts of
There was a
Thomas.
blacksmith in Thomas who reported to the paper, and his description spoke to me because I understand the dynamics of these tornadic storms. And he says that the wind, he could see the tornado coming at the village, but the wind was at his back. Now Thomas is east of the tornado, so the wind is coming from the east to the west, feeding into the tornado. In a modern diagram of a tornadic storm or supercell, we refer to that region as the inflow, and in storm chaser parlance as the one place in the storm you definitely don't want to be hanging around in, because the tornado is zipping along into that region. So it gives us a little bit better picture of the storm itself, how the storm is structured, where everything is located, where these features exist, and that they do exist. One of the big things with evaluating a system this far back is it a supercell? Is it a squall line? Is it a little popcorn storm? And the only way to really tell, we don't have Doppler radar, we don't have satellite imagery, we don't have much of anything, but what we do have is these accounts that can provide this evidence of structure that we can now tell this is a supercell. This sounds like a supercell. If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck, kind of thing.
Of course, it's changed over the years. Back in 1890, they were referring to it as a cyclone, and then tornado. And I guess the term supercell to me is a little more modern form of a very severe tornadic event. And maybe you can kind of define supercell for us a little.
A supercell,
so I could understand it.
Yep. A supercell is a very highly organized storm system where you have an inflow on the south end of the storm, where all the air is feeding into it and curling into the downdraft region. Then you have this big blanket of heavy precipitation to the north of the storm. Typically it's north and south, but you can get weird occurrences where they are kind of flipped around. I'm speaking more to the common. And that's what we refer to as a forward flank downdraft, an area that is ahead of the storm to a degree, ahead of that primary upward motion, but is descending air, a lot of rain, a lot of hail. It's where you get that, it's big hail, that's where you're going to get it. The rear flank downdraft is this little area of descending air that comes in behind the storm that wraps around into it. That's what we see as the hook echo on a radar, if you're looking at it. And a lot of this structure was not even known until the 1950s and preceding decades. So, like you said, it's a very modern term.
Okay. And probably since the terms come up, we see events that are described as supercells probably more often, but of course now the scientific methods of analyzing are probably much more sophisticated, so it's more easily identified as opposed to one monster tornado going across the county.
Right. Of course, the other thing with certain types of storm systems is that you don't see violent tornadoes, anything really above 3 in intensity, unless it is generally a supercell. You have a lot more prevalence of these violent tornadoes in storms of that nature, given their organization and intensity. They are the granddaddy.
Okay, we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll kind of wind up with the damage of the storm as the storm subsided.
Yep.
There's a lot of history to Oxford. Hidden around every corner, deep in every crack, and sometimes right in front of you, waiting to be discovered. If you just dig a little, you'll find the great history of our beautiful town. Welcome to Historic Oxford.
Welcome back to Oxford History Today. We're still talking about the tornado of 1896, and the storm has split up. A portion of it has gone towards Thomas, another portion has gone towards the southeast. I'm assuming two different paths of damage.
Oh, yeah.
When is the last damage on the portion that went toward Thomas?
The last portion of the damage is toward the county border between just to the northeast of Thomas, between Oakland and Lapeer counties. And around that time, that tornado dissipates out and fades away. And the next tornado is moving across and moving up into Lapeer County. The storm itself would have been moving more toward Leonard, but it starts curving northward as the storm itself begins to die. There will be no real additional tornadoes at this point. It's starting to wrap itself up.
Well, I got to remember with the new data that we got yesterday,
Oh, yeah.
that it actually designated that there was a rather specific sighting.
Touchdown point, yeah.
Yes, so there was
one more, at
there
least.
there was actually two at one time, because we have the data that shows south of where the sighting was, and that one went to Wigville and had a set of fatalities there as well.
Oh, I didn't realize there were fatalities that far
Yep.
east yet.
Yes, actually, almost just due south of Dryden, there were houses and fatalities south of Dryden.
Okay, and the old common story used to be that the one that hit Thomas went up towards Thornville, and the reason Thornville was saved was that it sat in the valley.
Terrain, there's always been a story about terrain in certain localities. One of them in Kansas a couple decades ago. Oh, the hill, it was like an Indian burial ground, and it protects the town and all this. And the unfortunate thing was they got a big tornado that went up the hill, down the hill, and right in the town. Terrain is not a saving grace, unfortunately, with some of these more violent events.
There was speculation that big towns, because they were heat islands, would not be hit, and that was dispelled rather in the early 2000s.
I believe the Nashville event,
Yeah.
where there was a big tornado that went right
okay.
through
F4.
downtown. F4, yeah. And it impacted skyscrapers. Even Ted Fujita, after the Fujita scale, indicated, oh, well, he actually ran the test of his tornado simulator machine and put in building blocks and things to simulate skyscrapers and the cold lake. There was a shallow pool of water, and the tornado and his lab dissipated, and he goes, oh, well, big towns must prevent this. No, unfortunately
So
not.
if it's like you hear of hurricanes that going over cold water, the storm will dissipate.
That's a different mechanism.
Different mechanism.
Okay.
And even then, in certain circumstances, in that regard, in late 2005, in very unfavorable conditions, they were still seeing tropical storms maintain themselves in those environments. Sometimes the weather just doesn't play nice with our assumptions.
Okay, so the storm has ended, and now we have this path that it traveled. And how precisely can you name the time when the storm actually started and ended?
Well, with the touchdown point, there are a lot of newspaper accounts. You hear a lot of 7 o'clocks and 6:30s. However, the sun set around that time of year. It was around 7 o'clock. It's Central Standard Time. Nowadays, there was no daylight savings time, of course. So
We were on Central Standard Time.
Yeah. The unfortunate thing is that as far as what we're seeing in the observations, people are seeing colors. People are actually seeing long distances. At one point, an observer in Thornville sees the tornado itself at 7 o'clock, and there's just...
That wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't have happened because with that little daylight, if it were at sunset under a storm, you just wouldn't see that kind of coloration. When you also look at other localities in a north to south line, you see that other localities were getting tornadoes earlier. So either this storm would have had to have lagged behind the forcing mechanism and be in an unfavorable position to even cause a tornado, potentially, or it occurred much earlier in the day, most likely around 5:36, along with the rest of the tornadoes along that point.
Okay. And so, but it's on the verge of being dark anyhow.
Yeah.
So now we have this, all this damage all the way across. We have dead, injured, houses demolished, darkness falls,
And it's chaos.
we don't have ambulances.
You have a disaster.
We don't have ambulances. Oakland County has one deputy sheriff for all of Oxford Township.
Yep.
And so what kind of happens to the people then?
The word gets out that from that area that every doctor that can needs to get moving to this area immediately. Doctors from Ortonville that was barely hit, Holly, all along the points, Oxford, are now streaming in to render aid as quickly as they can. As even the governor later on, not that night, but a couple of days later, personally arrives in Pontiac with a series of officials to start taking claims to figure out who needs aid and where. It was an all hands on deck for as well as the 1890s can get.
And of course, what we talk about for a safety net before or now, before when this occurred, there was very little of what we would recognize as a safety net.
There was none.
people.
There was absolutely nothing. The best you got was in the post office in Thomas. You saw a forecast for strong storms in the evening, which was pretty remarkable when you think about it, that we had that level of forecasting ability, but that was it. There's no tornado sirens. There's no TV or radio to push a warning over. There's no radar, no satellite. It's the bare minimum of meteorology, and there's just absolutely nothing. The best you got is right here, the Mark 1 eyeball, and you got to be able to know when the
This disaster literally pulled the whole state together. This was the first time that the state of Michigan actually responded to a disaster. There were other disasters in the state, such as the fires in the Thumb in the 70s and the 80s, in the 1870s, 1880s. They didn't respond. In this storm, they began to respond. They were taking damage claims. They were bringing relief supplies in.
lumber especially.
And the like. So there was a huge response to this because everybody noted the length, the breadth, and the absolute destruction. All the newspapers in the area were full, but it also brought out not just the best in people, but some of the worst as well. They were doing tours of the disaster area. They would rent wagons and ride through the disaster. They were rubbernecking then.
Even though it did help, because the people would see the devastation, they felt compelled to act. They felt compelled that it's like, oh my goodness, you have all this devastation, how can we help? People would return to their hometowns and say, I saw it with my own two eyes. It's that bad. Of course, you also had people who were on these tours taking souvenirs. There's a difference, of course, between the taking of pieces of debris off a road that have no meaning, it's a piece of a house, compared to some people who were looting, taking the jewelry from wrecked homes. In fact, one woman was recounted in the newspaper as being seen stealing jewelry from a residence that had been destroyed. And the newspaper indicated that if they had known her name, they would have published it in print at the top of the newspaper on page 1.
Okay. All right. We'll take another break, and we'll come back and finish up, and we'll go through some of the photographs that you've collected through your research, and we maybe describe some of the damage and how you're interpreting the damage that you can witness through these 100-year-old photographs.
Of course.
Canine Stray Rescue is Oxford's own local dog rescue. Call them at 248-628-0435 or go to their website dogsaver.org and click on the Canine Stray Rescue League link.
Welcome back. You've collected some really interesting things in your research here for your project, especially these some of the old photographs. Of course, we've opened the vault here at the museum for you to use our photographs and resources for your documentary. But perhaps you can share some of the photos here with the viewers and kind of explain what you're looking at. It's like I said, I think they're really interesting because not only do they show the damage from the storm, but they kind of reflect the human side of the story too. People losing everything. It has to be a terrible situation to all of a sudden, within minutes, find yourself with absolutely nothing except yourself. But
This first picture that we're going to be looking at is the Thomas Railroad Station, the elevator, and the hotel. And we have before and after pictures of the hotel and of the station and so on. And we just, that for us, that really gives an idea of the type of devastation and that. So, and the next set.
I think Thomas is kind of an interesting case because, I can kind of understand Oakwood never really rebuilt, but the technology of the time. If you wanted to be a town, you almost needed a railroad, and Oxford was fortunate that it had actually 3 railroads, and kind of became the economic and business center for this area. But Thomas was serviced by 1 railroad. And they certainly had businesses.
Pierre Marquette, I'm sorry.
Well, it was Michigan Central. But.
Yeah,
Oh,
yes.
yeah, Michigan Central.
And but what happened was we went back through their timetables, and you can see all of a sudden it stopped right there, and it no longer had passenger service. You were going to Metamora or Oxford to catch passenger service.
Okay.
It no longer had
The customer base
Customer
wasn't there.
base.
Yeah.
other photos that we've collected. This one is Wolverton's house at Oakwood. It's actually just west of Oakwood today.
Right.
And it has removed a section of the upper floor. And we have from Google Earth, you can actually see the new or repaired portions of it and so on. And it was interesting to see that they removed some portions of the architecture and just did not rebuild them. But those are all available we're going to have those available for everybody to see those. Now, this is one more just showing an injured individual, chunks of the house missing.
Well, I think that's interesting, in particular because this is actually one of the stereo pictures. An example here is we have the
Yes.
stereo viewer right here, where you have 2 images slightly offset, so you would have that 3D effect. So these are definitely taken by a professional photographer who's gone out there to
yeah.
record these scenes.
And we saw a lot of records going on that the photographers that were taking these photos were selling them as well.
Okay, and going through the state archives, and you mentioned you finding photos also in the state archives of some of the damage?
Very little in the archives.
I'm sorry, I believe it was University of Michigan.
University
Yeah.
of Michigan, yep. They have a full collection of a number of photographs. Some of these photographs we found on eBay, of all places.
Okay.
It was completely at random.
I just bought a local picture off of eBay myself. Not to advertise for eBay, but I found an interesting picture. But
This one here, we don't know exactly where it's at. There's no identification, but it shows literally a pile of lumber. It is somebody's house. It's F3, F4.
And we can tell at least like F3 kind of damage because under the new scale, F3, you'll see trees being stripped of bark. Under the old scale, that was F5, but I don't think they've built trees any differently in the last 100 years. So we're kind of adjusting things a little bit to fit more modern consensus.
and we have a piece of bark from Oakwood from the tornado that somebody collected
Maybe we can match it to the.
go and get a set of calipers, and we can measure the trees in the bark.
But this tree's missing all of its bark.
Yeah.
Okay, this is remarkable because of the fitted stone foundation, and literally everything's cleared off of it.
It's what's kind of amazing is you have what appears to be the front living room window frame is still there, and the rest of the
house is gone.
totally gone. Yeah.
Completely gone.
And that's That's into the F5 range.
Yeah.
Again, this is another, we do not know this location, but we can tell, again, this is the flooring and the rest of the house is gone and fairly scattered. So it ranges up into the F4 again. This one, we know exactly where it's at. La Flamboy's out by Ortonville area. And you can see the trees that are just, everything's, this one tree up on the road actually flew 16 rods.
And I'm trying to remember, a rod is similar to, it's longer than a yard, isn't it?
Oh, way longer. You're looking at 100 to 200 feet. Huge tree, and you can see an individual on a bicycle standing in the road. And it's not much of a road because of all the debris in it.
Now, is this Oakwood Road, do you know?
No.
Is this Thayer?
No, Thayer is to the west of this.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact name of this particular street. It's the north-south road to the east of Thayer Road.
Yeah. So, but it's, you can just see, there were two houses here.
Yeah.
You don't see a house there at all. This is stunning damage. And you can see that the trees are literally debarked, de-leafed, missing.
Almost delimbed.
In many cases, this one is completely de-limbed and so on. But you really do get an idea of the weather terror, if you will, that this actually took place.
Well, I think it's an amazing story. I'm looking forward to the documentary. And again, you're still in research and production. And
We're trying to wind that up. At one point or another, you always have to shoot the engineering staff and get on with the project.
Okay, Eric, don't kill the engineering staff.
We'll see.
But I know, I get involved in these projects, and you always find those last little things, oh my gosh, I haven't answered that question, but.
Well, at some point, you just got to wrap it up, and you got to.
Yep, you can get too far into the bushes, but I'm really looking forward to seeing the documentary. I think it's a interesting subject. It's great to hear a new perspective and the interest in it, and I think in many ways, this storm might be just almost as important today as it was 100 years ago.
Definitely. It just speaks to the greater importance of understanding the weather in the past in order to understand it for today and for the future. Just because it's old news doesn't make it any different.
And what I like about it is there's so much of a layman's perspective to it. A person who wouldn't. I know you're the meteorologist, but there's over the years there's been many assumptions that obviously just don't really apply. So once again, if they want to contribute their family photos or recollections to the project, so their stories can be memorialized, how do they provide the information to you?
Email me, and that would be emergingproductionsllc@gmail.com.
Okay. Well, thank you, Brian and Eric. And that wraps up this episode, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Abigail Adams here, just checking up on our springtime goat work on the Pollyant Trail. What's that? Trash on our beautiful trail? Oh, that makes me so happy. We've got so many trash cans all over the trail. It's a beautiful day on the trail, but oh no, this could end badly. Wow, that sure was nice. Folks know not to hog the road. Even goats share. Hey, that gets my goat. Where are you going? Even I have to be out here on a leash. You sure are a nice dog, but stay away from those weeds. I'm gonna eat them later. What a beautiful gift, our Pollyant Trail. I've got to hit the trail. I hope you will too.